All right, welcome to episode 2 of season 2. And the focus of this episode is apprenticeship training contract, Louise. So, intense.
Yeah.
Okay, can you give us a simple definition of the contract?
Yeah. So in episode 1 we went over the importance of making sure this contract is signed and done
Yes.
by your ASIN, which, we gave some examples of MEGT, Verto, that kind of thing. So this definition I'm reading from newsouthwales.gov, and it's what is a training contract. So pretty simply put, the training contract is a legally binding agreement between the employer and the apprentice. So the training contract outlines each party's responsibility in the apprenticeship and traineeship, what qualification the apprentice will get, which registered training organisation is delivering the training. So registered training organisation is usually TAFE in Australia. The employment arrangements and industrial award, how long the apprenticeship or traineeship training period is. So the next bit in that, like what I'm reading from here as well, is the employer information in the training contract. This includes, the details of the business and all that kind of thing. And the employer's responsibilities include making sure the apprenticeship and trainee is clear on choices they have regarding their training, providing the right facilities and experienced people to train, supervise and support the apprentice, working with the RTO and the apprentice according to the training plan, allowing the apprentice or trainee time off work with pay to attend formal training and assessment, providing work relevant to the vocation and achievement of the qualification, and providing appropriate wages and conditions. So this is some of the responsibilities that the employer has for the apprentice. So Raman, I think you've got another document up there to quote from, and then we'll get into discussing what it actually means.
Certainly, I think that's quite intense. And anyone who's read the Apprenticeship Act and also the contract for how it is, it can be very confusing. But I think the key aspects there are start date, end date, making the qualification is rightly captured, because in some qualifications, the definitions are very close. It could be a different qualification you've picked. So, and the duration of that contract. So I think what I like to refer to, and I've always referred to, is a rather simple document called the National Code of Good Practice for Australian Apprenticeships, and it could be found on the Australian apprenticeships.gov.au. Again, we'll provide the link in the section comment section of this podcast. But it's what it says here clearly outlines what both parties need to understand, and they've given a paragraph by paragraph, maybe 2 or 3 lines in each paragraph, what both parties need to understand commonly, and then they've gone into what the employer's obligations are, and then what the apprentice's obligations are, and obviously there are rights and duties and all those things. But it's a nice 4-page document. It could be downloaded. It can be emailed. It's in PDF format, and look, I always recommend employers print it out and give it to the apprentices, but also give it to the supervisor. Okay, so that both of them understand it upfront.
Yep.
So if you look at the key aspects of it, they say both parties need to understand it's a formal agreement, and it's not just like casual. Don't take it casually. And I think it's it's a combination of employment and training agreement. And as I said, it does definitely emphasize on that you are working towards achieving a qualification. Both parties have to sincerely participate and meet their obligation in it. So it's called an apprenticeship contract. It's also called an apprenticeship training contract. An offshoot of that is a training plan, but it also has elements where the rights and responsibilities are repeated as well. So there are more than enough instances and places where there is a sufficient reminder for all parties about what's involved. Okay,
Yeah.
it's sounding a bit intense. Louise, just loosen this up for us.
Yeah.
Just loosely, what do you think are the obligations of the employer?
So the employer, pretty much, simply put, their obligation is to ensure that the apprentice can complete the apprenticeship with all the relevant training they need. So whether that training be on-site training, so as in learning on the job, and also training, allowing and releasing the apprentice with pay, which is very important. So I know in other countries it might be a bit different, but in Australia, if you're going to training without pay, that's actually a break of the contract. So allowing the apprentice to attend that training, and, you know, we say this as like sometimes it's legally binding, but actually I was having a conversation yesterday where an apprentice was going to training without being paid. And so many people, you know, you see as tradies, a lot of us get into the industry because we don't like paperwork. But I think this is one, if you're going to read any document, I think this is really important to know your rights and obligations.
Certainly, I think what becomes the obligation of one party is the right of the other party. So just summarizing briefly so broadly the document here which I'm talking about says that the employer is supposed to or responsible, it's an obligation of the employer to provide the apprentice with a safe working environment, right? So you worked in the industry. So safe environment can mean many things.
Yeah.
Right? Now, it could be, yes, the physical work environment, but also the mental work environment.
Yeah, there's another word for it, but the psychology. They've brought out a document, actually, a legal document recently in the last few weeks. So what are we're in May 2023. So I think in April the document was released on psycho something safety. And it's all about that mental health of the workplace. So when we talk about creating a safe environment, we're talking about having the right tools and resources to do your job safely. And then also not being bullied, being able to communicate with your supervisor, not being scared to go to work, not being scared to speak up. That all comes under the obligation of the training contract.
So, and it says here, provide a safe workplace free from bullying and verbal, physical, racial, and sexual abuse. Okay? Clearly, it says ensuring that all occupational health and safety requirements are addressed and providing an appropriate introduction to the workplace, which is a proper induction, stressing those core occupational health and safety requirements essential to the workplace safety, which is of the self and others. And I think certainly educating the apprentice on the duty of care aspect in that regard. So not only do you work safely for yourself, but for others as well.
Yeah, that's it. And I think we can even go into like what that statement actually means in practice. Like, so if we talk about duty of care and safety, we always hear the saying that safety is everyone's responsibility. But say as a young apprentice or someone, say a mature age coming from an office-based environment into a trade environment, they don't know what to look out for. As tradies, we spend years building up our awareness around what can go wrong. And as a supervisor or as a tradesperson looking after an apprentice, they don't have that same awareness.
Yeah, and I think even if we as apprentices have heard, you should have known this.
Yeah.
How would I?
How would you know? Like, you don't know what you don't know. Exactly. And I think that's something where apprentices kind of might talk themselves out of saying, oh, no, they're telling me that I should have known.
Yeah.
But really, how could have you known?
No, you have to be, yes. Then the other aspect is that the employer is obligated to support structured training, all right? Now, structured training is basically, this involves providing opportunities to develop knowledge and skills. Yeah, it also involves enrolling them into a qualification in an RTO, which is convenient both to the apprentice and the employer. And there are units of competency for each qualification to give them that opportunity to go to TAFE or RTO, I should say. And then when they come back, provide them with relevant experience to a level where they can then work independently.
Yeah, that's it. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about what to do as the apprentice if you're not getting that experience. Yes. But right now, so when we talk unit of competency, it pretty much means what subject you're doing. Yes. And that's where the training plan that we mentioned comes into it. So part of the agreement is that the contract that we're talking about, it's between the apprentice and the employer, but then they need to agree on a training plan. And that training plan is supplied by the Registered Training Organisation, which is TAFE, most commonly. But the training plan is pretty much the TAFE's contract. So it's got your start date, your finish date, how many subjects you should complete, all that kind of stuff in there. So say if something is happening on the training side of things, and so you're not getting your TAFE dates, or you feel like you should be finished but you're not, that contract is what is legally binding that institute, that registered training organisation.
Certainly, I think, and whilst the agreement is the legal document, the legal agreement, the training plan is the actual working document. Yeah, so it outlines all the subjects or the unit of competency, and then theory and practical and the workplace evidence. So of that. So for our listeners who haven't got an idea of that, I would say for example, there is a heavy vehicle mechanic apprentice. So they go to college, and one of the units is to service and repair braking systems. All right. So they go to the college, the RTO, attend the classroom session, do the practical, pass the assessments. Then they come to the workplace. Then they should be able to practice servicing of braking systems on a few different vehicles, in few different types of braking systems, to the satisfaction of their supervisor or the supervising technician, who also has, by the way, the same qualification, to then say he's achieved competency or she has achieved competency or they have achieved competency. Okay.
Yeah.
And once that happens, it's fed back to the RTO and they will tick it off. So in the 4 years, they will collect these and achieve completion of their apprentice.
So what you're really talking about is most qualifications have workplace evidence.
Yes.
So say generally with your training, there's 3 parts to completing a subject or a unit of competency: the written assessment, the practical assessment, and the workplace evidence. So the workplace evidence is what brings the employer back into this. So say another thing that you can say would be a breach of the contract as an example is, say, if you're a mechanical apprentice or any apprentice really, and you're mostly running around to get parts. You're running around to get materials, but you're not actually building anything, repairing anything, diagnosing anything. That is technically a breach of the contract by your employer.
Certainly. And before we move to the apprentice obligations, I just want to cover one more aspect. Is maybe 2. So the one important part is here is provide supervision and support. Okay. So what do you think is supervision, Louise?
Yeah, so supervision is for really legally. Supervision should be up until any licensed trade, up until the person has their license. Yeah. So this should mean like an apprentice, especially first and second year, should always be working with a tradesperson. And then when we go into 3rd and 4th year, that kind of line gets blurred as the apprentice gets more confident and has more knowledge, where usually the apprentice would be working, say, next to, so say we've got 2 trucks and a tradesperson is working on one truck and the 3rd and 4th year is working on a truck next to them. So there is someone there supervising. Technically, they shouldn't be out doing jobs on their own, especially in that 1st and 2nd year, not just because of the training contract, which is legally binding, but safety. Really, technically, depending on who you go to, some businesses have this as like one of their rules. But even I believe that if you are out doing work, you shouldn't be on your own.
Certainly. But there are aspects like getting, apart from somewhere, drive to a customer, get some paperwork. Those things obviously fall outside the realm of it. And certainly it's like teaching someone to swim, right? You're very careful when they're in the early stages, and slowly you're watching from a distance. You're not swimming next to them. That'll be weird. So you slowly let them go, and that's what you're trying to build them up to, is that. And I think literally, if you speak to a lot of tradespeople, they really like training apprentices because someone has trained them well, and it's always, but it's a question of the communication and understanding it mutually. The one other obligation which probably should have been the first one in that document, it says advise the Australian apprentice of their rights and responsibilities. So, and that's where the induction aspect comes in.
Yeah.
Tell them the rules, and then you can watch them perform or deliver or abide by those rules. So if you don't tell them what's expected, they won't know. So that's one of the obligations of the employer, to make them aware. Perhaps then just print this and explain.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's something that gets missed a lot.
Yes.
And even like sometimes when that induction week, like we were talking about in our first episode of season 2, like there's a lot of information. So having something like this quick document that's 3 pages going over everything is really important, because You know, when shit might hit the fan in your 3rd or 4th year, you don't have your work evidence signed off, you're not confident, you haven't done certain jobs. This is when this document really comes to light.
Certainly. And I think I believe in bite-sized education. You know, if you have a toolbox talk or a morning pre-start meeting, you can hold the apprentices back for maybe another 10 minutes, maybe one bit of information today, and then tomorrow, and then also assess the understanding. So the more you communicate in bite size, the more success you would have, is what I think. Now, we were talking all about employers' obligations. Let's move to the Australian apprentice. And it says the Australian apprentice will. So the first one here is be aware of and make commitment to fulfill work responsibilities. What do you understand by that?
So fulfill work responsibilities. So pretty much it's to do anything reasonably asked by the employer, turn up to work on time, be safe to the best, I say to the best of their ability, because they might not have awareness of some things, but should be safe to the best of their ability. I think that's like mostly what comes to mind right now.
Yeah, and look what it says here is take care of workplace property and resources.
Yeah.
So if you've been given a company car, don't do burnouts. But things like that.
We laugh because we know.
Yeah, I know. It does happen. There is a certain temptation to that. And it also said respecting the rights of other Australian apprentices and employers in the workplace. So that's what they say an apprentice should do. It's also important. Attend and perform work in a professional and courteous manner.
Yeah.
In accordance with the employer's requirements. Now,
So I think we'll talk more. We might do a whole episode on this.
Yes.
But that attendance is really, really important.
Yes.
Sometimes, when you start an apprenticeship, you might not know if it's for you or not, really, because you might not have experienced workplace plus a trade thing. But it's really important to either be all in or out. So I've experienced this with many different apprentices that I've come across and tradespeople. But that comes in, it's legally binding for you to be there if you've signed the contract. So, you've got your annual leave, you've got your sick leave, you've got your personal leave, all that kind of stuff. But you have to want to be there and you have to actually be there.
Certainly. And there's a big aspect of communication and where it falls. There's another one here which says, remembering that information obtained from the employer must be kept confidential.
Yeah.
And not disclosed without approval from the employer. So, Louise, now with the age of mobile phone cameras, that is the temptation, right? Especially if you're doing amazing work.
And a lot of people, we share a lot of our lives on social media. So I personally do share a lot of my life and my day-to-day on social media. But it's really important that if you do this, you can ask permission. Sometimes, some sites you might not have permission. Sometimes you do. Sometimes it's almost encouraged to share what you're doing at work. It all depends on the workplace.
Certainly. And I think modern day employers love, they understand, they appreciate the importance of social media in promoting that. So if there are some rules pre-agreed upon, like you don't share customers' details or don't share specifics, don't share the secrets, then I think it'll be a good thing, right? It could be used well.
We say this because at one of our workplaces, there was an apprentice who was taking photos of a truck that wasn't allowed to have photos taken of.
Certainly.
Yeah, and even in that workplace, it was okay for us to take photos and share our work, but there was specific rules and rules around some particular trucks.
Certainly. Yeah. So understand that. Now the one other obligation which is broadly worded here is be aware of and make a commitment to fulfilling training responsibilities. Now, under that it says making all reasonable efforts to achieve the competencies specified in the training plan and undertaking any training and assessment required. So you willingly agree to you face a test or an exam or to be assessed on things. People might say, don't want an exam. It's required for that. And you agree to that in this contract.
You agree to the contract, but then you also sign the training plan as well.
Certainly.
So in that training plan, it comes up with what you need to do and what subjects you need to do. And like we said, in each one, there's the work evidence, the written assessment, and the practical assessment. Now, there's something called reasonable adjustments. So say if you have a learning difficulty, if you have a writing difficulty, those kind of things, if they're put up front to your teacher and that kind of thing, there are some adjustments that can be made.
Certainly, yeah, they can. There's also things such as attending training sessions or supervised workplace activities and taking advantage of the learning opportunities.
Yeah. So, turning up to TAFE, turning up to training, paying attention. So pretty much if you come to TAFE hungover and not really paying attention and falling asleep, you're technically breaking the contract.
And it says if you are sick, you can't go to TAFE.
Yeah.
Because it's to be treated like a workplace.
That's it.
And
so I know there can be a bit of a grey
Yes.
area with that. So say if an injury can be managed around the specific practical task. So say I've seen apprentices come with broken wrists, but the task wasn't too physically demanding. So that was talked about with the TAFE teacher.
But that's you're talking about a return to sort of work plan.
Yeah.
But the apprentice can't make that call by himself or herself. It has to be done by a system,
Yeah,
including the apprentice as
Yeah,
well.
attending TAFE is
Yes.
just like attending the workplace.
Work, exactly. And then
And you are paid the same.
it is. And I think on that list, before we call it an episode, maintaining a record of training, such as your training record book. So it could be supplied by the employer, it could be given by the TAFE. All the documentation the maintenance is the responsibility of the apprentice.
Yeah, and a lot of this stuff can come down to, he said, she said kind of stuff.
Sure.
So in the modern day, we've all got a phone, sometimes two in our pockets. If you're handing in any documentation, as the apprentice or as the employer, I always recommend take a photo of it. Even though it's supposed to be confidential, it can still be confidential if you have your own personal copy of it. Anything that you sign, you have rights to have a copy of that as well. So say if you're handing over your work evidence book, you spent 3 years collecting it, it might be a bit of a challenge, but at least take, maybe a few photos and stuff to say that you have completed it and you have handed it in case that book does get lost or anything like that.
Yeah, and look, nowadays the RTOs have come up with use of technology. So apprentices can use an app to upload the evidence and tick the boxes as they go, submit it to a supervisor for signatures. So it's become very efficient.
Yeah.
And I think from your own experience, Louise, it's always good to stay on track with the training plan.
Yeah.
Finish when they are required because it's all fresh in your mind and keep going.
That's it. So there's a few different setups of training plans. We'll talk a whole thing about training, whole episode. But yeah, it's important to keep on track of that because, like I said, it's legally binding. So say if you haven't been booked into a class for 6 months, that's a breach of the contract. If you haven't rocked up to the class in 6 months, but it's been on, breach of the contract. If the employer hasn't let you go to the class, also breach of the contract.
It is. And if they allow you and you have said, I'm going to TAFE and you're going somewhere else, then that's also breach of contract.
Yeah.
So to summarize, we've tried to unpack the intense term apprenticeship training contract and try to simplify as much as we can.
Yeah.
But it boils down to, hey, it's a legal agreement. Remember that. You have consciously signed it and accepted all the terms and conditions of the contract and literally just expecting you to do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And no party is higher or lower in this. All parties are equally involved. There are rights, but there are also obligations.
Yeah.
And the contract ends with the end of the apprenticeship.
That's it.
Okay.
And even so, we're more than happy to talk through with you if you think anything's been breached. But you have your ASIN, or so like Verdo, MEGT, the person who signed that contract, you should have a contact number for them.
Certainly.
So anytime in your apprenticeship where you think something is being breached, you have a person to contact. You might not remember who they are, but it's always good to have, if you're a first year and you're going through this, save their number, make sure you know who they are. But even as a third or a fourth year, if something is going on, then give them a call. They're the ones who enforce the contract.
And I think you said in the beginning of the podcast, read it well, understand it well. And
if you're going to read anything, read that one.
Read that one. And I think it will, if you read it well, if you understood it well, you would be able to see signs very early on. So you can catch it when it's little and stop it from becoming big.
That's it.
And you can sort it out. So I think let's wrap it up.
Yeah, definitely. All good. All right. So we'll see everyone in the next episode.